Welcome back. How do we handle asynchronous code? Because our code is not always going to be synchronous. We can't always just use try, catch. When we have an asynchronous function and an error occurs inside of it, our script would have continued with our execution so that by the time this returns with an error, well, this entire script would have been done. And the way we handle these types of errors in JavaScript is using the catch method. Now, in this video, I'm going to show you how to handle errors in promises and also in async await, which will have an interesting way of handling errors. So let's start off with promises. And to make things easy, I'm going to use the shorthand syntax of promise.resolve, which just returns a promise. See that over here? So it returns a promise that resolves right away, and I can just give it a piece of text here. Let's say async fail, so that it returns a promise with async fail. It won't show over here because in order to catch a promise, we need to do, or in order to get the value from a promise that returns, we need a .then, as we've seen in the asynchronous part of the course. Now in here, I'll get a response, and this response will be returned right here, and I can just console log response. If I click run here, look at that, I get async fail. All right, so far so good. Everything is working, but let's say we have another .then promise here, or .then block here that gets a response. We can just return the same response, and that's still going to run. We're console logging response twice. Okay, but let's say something happens in our code, and instead of getting to this console log and the return statement, we're going to throw a new error that simply says number one fail. If I run this, I didn't get anything. No errors. And this is a big gotcha, especially on browsers, where if we don't catch something, especially in asynchronous code, it does what we call a silent fail. It fails silently. So our code could have failed and we have no idea as programmers that it's failed. It's extremely dangerous. So we need to make sure that with our promises, we always have a .catch clause. And honestly, I can't think of any reason not to have a .catch with a promise to make sure that you catch everything. And it works just like the try-catch block, or the catch part of the try-catch block. We simply receive an error, and inside of here, I can just console.log the actual error. So that if I run this, look at that, I get error. Number one, fail. Now the interesting thing here is that because I return the response, we should get a console.log here, but it never happens, right? Because we throw the new error and the JavaScript engine says, all right, I'm not doing anything more. Where's a hurdle? Where's a catch? And it's going to find a catch block here and say, all right, here's the error, console log this error. So we're handling this issue. Now you can actually keep going here. If I had, let's say, another .then in here, and this .then actually, well, let's say returns or receives the error that this catch block receives. Well, if I run this, look at that. It console logs the error because I can do anything I want in the catch block, right? If I return the error here, the .then is going to receive the response, and this will be the error. So if I do response.message, I get number one fail. And I can keep chaining these. I can say .catch over here, and this receives another error that, let's say, console logs final error. If I run this, that's never going to run because when the throw new error happens, the JavaScript engine says, all right, who's going to catch me? It's going to keep going down and say, oh, I just got caught by something. And now once it's caught, it's handled. So unless we throw a new error here, it's not going to get caught. So if I do error number 2 and I run this, there you go. Final error gets caught. And that's the only error that happens because, well, we pass this into the first catch block and then we throw another error from here because let's say we don't know what to do with it, and then the next catch block catches it. Now, the interesting thing here is if we go back to our original issue where we don't catch anything and our program silently fails. That's bad, right? In programs like Node.js, which is another runtime, and I have here a REPL that uses Node.js instead of JavaScript. So you can see over here that we're using Node version 9.7. If I run this, because it's a different runtime, it's going to handle that error differently. If I click run, I get something called unhandled promise rejection warning. And I guarantee you, if you're working with promises, you're going to see that many times in your career, where you mistakenly forget to catch an async error with a promise, and Node is telling you, hey, a promise rejection happens. And this error originated because, well, you didn't have a catch block. So you need to make sure that you add a .catch. So depending on the runtime, it gets handled differently. And this is extremely dangerous in programs like, let's say, a Node server, where you want the server running constantly. If you have an unhandled promise rejection, it could spell your application might be leaving a critical error unattended to. So you want to be really, really careful with that. And it's a big gotcha when it comes to error handling asynchronous code. Now, if we go back to this example, let's say that we've fixed our promises, so we have a catch block now, but let's say we have another promise inside of a promise. So nested promises. Something like this, where we have a promise.resolve, once again, inside of here. And this is going to have a .then that, well, for now we don't have to worry about the response because inside of here, I want to throw a new error. And this error is going to say number 3 fail. What do you think will happen here? Well, if I run this, look at that. I get final error. But what is this undefined? Well, if in here, let's say I return 5 and I click run, look at that. Console log 5 works. Because this .then block has asynchronous code inside of it, well, it doesn't really care what happens. The promise, when it first runs, is a pending promise. So it goes to the next line. There's no error inside of this because it reads it synchronously. And it returns 5, which gets received here as .then. We console log the response, and we have 5. The final error runs because we throw the error in here. So if I removed this catch block and I click run here, all right, the error is still there because we throw a new error and our program keeps going up the stack until we find something that catches us. That's good, but it still has some surprising behavior here with the 5. What happens if we run this code in Node? If I go over here and I copy and paste and I run this, I get the same thing, but I get this error again, unhandled promise rejection warning. It's saying, hey, buddy, you're not handling your promises properly. You have another promise here, and this one doesn't get handled. It just gets handled by the enclosing scope, which, I mean, it is a little bit confusing. Luckily for you, you've added the .catch, but is that really what you intended? Again, this is not good, right? Ideally, we catch something for each promise. so that in here we can catch, and let's just console.log the error here. So that if I run this, I get error 3 fail. We're now handling it with this console log. But hold on a second. We still have final error. Why is that? Again, this is where promises get really, really tricky, and you want to make sure that you're handling your errors properly. You see this response.message? Do you think that exists? If I remove this message from here and do run, did you see that? It is now undefined because we don't receive any responses here. Remember, we return 5, and this .then block receives it in console logs. And this .then block doesn't return anything. So when I did response.message, that was actually the error that was being thrown and being caught by the final error. And if you're confused right now, well, this shows you how tricky it can be to handle asynchronous promises. So you want to make sure to really understand your flow, and that on each level, you're handling these promises with a .catch call, and that instead of having something like final error, you're actually logging out the error to understand what's happening. So let's fix this. Let's remove this from here. The final error will be actually logging out our error, so that if I run this, all right, everything is now good. We're handling our promises each individually right here with the .catch, and everything is working well. If I run this in Node and I click run, all right, perfect. We're handling our errors perfectly, and there's no unhandled promise rejection. Awesome. Now, this was a little complicated, but I hope it's starting to make sense. Although there are some cases where it can get a little difficult. And luckily for us, because this chaining can get really overwhelming and complicated, we have the new async await in JavaScript, right? Which we've learned about in our async part of the course. Now, we can handle these things a little bit different than we've handled those promises. I mean, async await underneath the hood are still promises, but the way we handle them can be a lot simpler. Let's find out how that works in the next video.